I want to know what the processes are that they might
Mm.
use to make that assessment. And if they're making that assessment based on the fact that, well, frankly, they need bodies on the street, that's exactly the wrong end to be starting from. They've got to be taking the assessment around whether that person is appropriate to be on duty, the seriousness of the offence, and be considering suspension whether that's appropriate or not.
We're due to get a big the Casey review into what was going on in the Metropolitan Police. But today, it's been revealed that more than 100 Metropolitan Police officers are still working on the front line, despite being under investigation for sexual misconduct. The Liberal Democrats unearthed the numbers. The party's chief whip, Wendy Chamberlain, who's a former police officer herself, joins me now. Wendy, just take us through this data. 100 serving police officers under investigation.
Well, what our numbers showed is that 548 police officers are under investigation for sexual misconduct or domestic abuse, and that 144 of them continue to be on normal duties. Now, almost 100 of them left the force, and I'd like to know what's happening with them as well. But for me, Matt, it comes back to the very basics of policing by consent, that police officers do what they do with the consent of the public, and that's based on trust. And these kind of figures just suggest that the low trust that the force is experiencing, the Met in particular, is well founded.
I mentioned that you were a police officer yourself for 12 years, so you're very
Yes.
experienced in what it's like inside the police force. I know it wasn't with the Met, but do these stories we've heard about the behaviour, the culture within the police, does this ring true with your experience when you were an officer?
Yes, so I joined in 1999 Lothian Borders Police when I was 22, and I'm not going to pretend that as a young female officer I don't recognise some of the behaviours that have been reported here in the Met. And I think it's important to remember some of these behaviours aren't limited to the Met. There are 44 police forces across the UK, and even last week, Police Scotland had an incident relating to a WhatsApp group. I think what has changed things is that social media, WhatsApping, those groups where, dare I say it, those with poor behaviours and opinions can share those, and that has kind of maybe developed some of the culture that we are seeing, and potentially makes that more difficult to root out. But for me, in terms of these figures, I want to know what the processes are that they might
Mm.
use to make that assessment. And if they're making that assessment based on the fact that, well, frankly, they need bodies on the street, that's exactly the wrong end to be starting from. They've got to be taking the assessment around whether that person is appropriate to be on duty, the seriousness of the offence, and be considering suspension whether that's appropriate or not.
And I mentioned the Casey review. It's coming tomorrow. We've had a bit of a preview of it on the front of the Times today,
Yeah.
suggesting that the Met could be broken up if it doesn't rapidly overhaul a toxic culture. The Baroness Casey has found institutional problems of sexism, racism, and homophobia. This has been described as a do or die moment for the Met. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think that's exactly where we are. I think there's definitely issues about governance. I mean, when I think about Police Scotland, I was not supportive of the amalgamation of the 8 forces in Scotland into one, because I felt that that local accountability would be difficult. And I think when you have a force the size of the Met, I think you see the same challenges. And sometimes standing in the chamber where we've had, dare I say it, too many statements or urgent questions relating to the Met and conduct, it feels that the government passed the buck to the London mayor, and then that happens vice versa. So I do think this is a moment where this is another report, and another one that is going to be particularly damning, and I think there needs to be some action. I think there's real questions around the responsibilities that the Met has, not only in terms of policing the City of London and carrying out those duties, but the national responsibilities that it holds. And with the development of agencies such as the National Crime Agency, is it right for those responsibilities to lie within what is a geographical force?
Wendy Chamberlain, good to speak to you. Lib Dem MP and a former police officer, and we'll have plenty more on that report by Baroness Casey throughout the day on Times Radio tomorrow.